The city of Los Angeles stretched out below like a constellation of artificial stars, 10 million souls compressed into a grid of light and shadow. From the 42nd floor of Parkview Tower, the traffic on Wilshire Boulevard looked like blood cells moving through arteries, each car carrying its own private catastrophe or triumph invisible from this height. Victoria Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse, one hand pressed against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the building swaying in the wind. The glass was cold. Everything in this apartment was cold. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop behind her. She didn't turn around. The notification would be the same as the last 12. Email from her CFO about quarterly projections. Text from her assistant about tomorrow's board meeting. Calendar reminder about the investor dinner she had already rescheduled twice. The rhythm of her life had become predictable in its relentlessness. Wake at 5. Shower, coffee, emails until 7, gym until 8, office by 9, meetings until 6, home by 8, work until midnight, sleep until 5, repeat. Except she wasn't sleeping anymore. Victoria turned away from the window and walked toward the kitchen. Her reflection caught in the polished steel of the refrigerator door. Dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could fully hide. Cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. She had lost weight without trying. Her personal trainer kept asking if she was eating enough. Her assistant kept suggesting she take a vacation. Her mother kept calling from Connecticut to ask if she was seeing anyone, as if a relationship would solve the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like concrete. The coffee maker sat on the counter, pristine and expensive, the kind of appliance that required an instruction manual and a YouTube tutorial. She pressed the button. The machine hummed to life. While it brewed, she opened the cabinet above the sink and pulled out a bottle of prescription sleeping pills. The label warned against operating heavy machinery, against drinking alcohol, against taking more than one tablet per day. She had taken 2 last night and still woke at 3 in the morning, with her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. The coffee finished brewing. She poured it into a white ceramic mug, added nothing, and carried it to the dining table. The table could seat 12. She had never had 12 people in this apartment. She had never had 6. The few times she entertained, it was at restaurants where she could control the environment, where she could leave when the conversation became too personal, where she could maintain the image of the woman who had built a software empire from a dorm room idea and a maxed-out credit card. That woman didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. Victoria opened her laptop and stared at the screen. 83 unread emails since midnight. She clicked on the first one. A product manager asking for approval on a new feature. She read the same sentence 3 times before realizing she had absorbed none of it. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard and the words came back into focus. She typed a response, deleted it, typed it again. Her hands were shaking. This had been happening more frequently. The shaking, the dizziness, the sensation that the floor was tilting beneath her feet. 3 weeks ago, she had gone to her doctor. A physical exam, blood work, and EKG. The doctor had smiled and told her she was in perfect health. Stress probably, overwork. The modern epidemic of high-achieving women who burn themselves out chasing success. He suggested meditation, exercise, maybe therapy. Victoria had nodded and thanked him and walked out of his office, knowing he was wrong. This wasn't stress. This was something else. Something she couldn't name but could feel spreading through her body like ink in water. She closed the laptop and carried her coffee to the balcony. The main balcony, the one visible from the living room, the one designed for entertaining guests she never invited. The door slid open with a whisper. Cold air hit her face. November in Los Angeles meant temperatures in the 50s at night, low 60s during the day. Not cold by most standards, but cold enough that she should have grabbed a sweater. She didn't. The cold felt good. It made her feel something other than numb. The city hummed below. Somewhere out there, people were living actual lives, falling in love, having children, fighting with their families, making mistakes and fixing them, building something real instead of building a brand. Victoria wondered what that felt like. She had built her company on the premise that technology could improve healthcare, that better data could save lives. The irony wasn't lost on her that she couldn't save her own. She lifted the coffee mug to her lips and realized her hands were shaking again. The liquid sloshed over the rim and burned her thumb. She set the mug down on the small table and gripped the railing. Breathe, just breathe. The dizziness came in waves now. She closed her eyes and waited for it to pass. When she opened them, the sun was beginning to rise, pink and orange spreading across the horizon like a wound. She checked her phone. 5:45. Time to get ready for another day of pretending everything was fine. Terrell Johnson's alarm went off at 10:30. Not morning, night. He reached over and silenced it before the sound could wake Maya, who slept in the twin bed across the room. His mother's house in Englewood was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled like decades of cooking, and a living room where the furniture had been the same since Terrell was a child. His mother slept in the master bedroom. Terrell and Maya shared the second bedroom when he stayed over, which was most weeknights. It wasn't ideal, but it was what worked. He sat up slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. Maya's breathing was steady and deep. She slept like he used to before Shanice got sick, before he learned that sleep could be interrupted by alarms that weren't alarms, but phone calls from hospitals. Before he learned that the worst news always came in the middle of the night. Terrell stood and walked to the bathroom. He showered quickly, dressed in the dark. Black pants, black polo shirt, black shoes. The uniform of invisibility. People didn't notice janitors, didn't look at them, didn't remember their faces. He had been cleaning office buildings in residential towers for 7 years, and he could count on one hand the number of residents who knew his name. He walked back to the bedroom and stood over Maya's bed. She was 9 years old and looked more like her mother every day. Same deep brown skin, same high cheekbones, same slight gap between her front teeth. Terrell reached down and adjusted the blanket that had slipped off her shoulder. She stirred but didn't wake. He bent down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the smell of the coconut oil his mother used on her hair. His mother was already awake when he walked into the kitchen. She sat at the small table with a cup of tea still in her bathrobe, reading something on her phone. She looked up when he entered. How'd she do with her homework? Finished it before dinner. Math is getting harder, though. She's going to need a tutor soon. His mother nodded. I can ask around at church. Someone's bound to know a high school kid who could help. Terrell poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot his mother had made. It was strong enough to strip paint. He added milk and sugar until it tasted like something he could drink. You working late tonight, same as always. Should be done by 6. His mother looked at him over the rim of her teacup. You look tired. I'm fine. That's what you always say, because it's always true. His mother didn't push. She had learned not to. After Shanice died, Terrell had shut down. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly like a door closing. His mother had tried to get him to talk about it, to see a counselor, to join a grief support group at church. He had thanked her and declined and kept going to work, because work was the only thing that made sense. Work had rules. Work had a beginning and an end. Work didn't ask questions he didn't know how to answer. He finished his coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. His mother stood and walked over to him. She was shorter than him by a full head, but she had a way of making herself seem taller when she wanted to. You take care of yourself. You hear me? Yes, ma'am. I mean it, Terrell. You're no good to Maya if you work yourself to death. I know. She reached up and touched his cheek. Her hand was warm. For a moment, Terrell let himself lean into it. Then he straightened and pulled away. I'll call you in the morning before I pick her up. His mother nodded. We'll be ready. Terrell grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and walked out into the night. The air was cold and damp. Fog rolling in from the coast, the kind that made the streetlights look like they were glowing underwater. He walked to his car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had been Shanice's before she got too sick to drive. The driver's side door stuck. He yanked it open and slid inside. The interior smelled like the pine tree air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, and underneath that faintly like Shanice's perfume. 3 years gone, and he could still smell her. The drive to Parkview Tower took 40 minutes. Terrell listened to the radio. Sports talk. Someone arguing about whether the Lakers would make the playoffs. Someone else arguing about whether it mattered. He turned it off. The silence was better. He parked in the underground garage and took the service elevator to the lobby. The building was quiet. Most residents were asleep or out. The night shift security guard, a guy named Marcus who Terrell had worked with for 2 years, nodded at him from behind the desk. 42 tonight, same as always. Marcus handed him a key card. Terrell swiped it and took the freight elevator up. The elevator moved slowly, stopping at every fifth floor, whether anyone got on or not. Some kind of safety feature. Terrell leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He was tired. His mother was right about that, but tired was better than thinking. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor. Terrell stepped out into the hallway. Thick carpet, recessed lighting, the smell of expensive candles that burned in lobbies but never in actual apartments. He walked to the end of the hall and stopped in front of the penthouse door. Unit 4201, Victoria Reed. He had been cleaning this apartment for 8 months. He knew the layout by heart, knew where every light switch was, knew which floorboards creaked, knew that the shower in the guest bathroom had slightly better water pressure than the one in the master. He knew all of this without ever really knowing the person who lived here. Victoria Reed was a name he recognized from magazine covers in grocery stores, from headlines on news sites he didn't have time to read. She ran a company called MedTech Solutions that made software for hospitals. Something about data analysis and patient outcomes. Terrell didn't fully understand it, but he knew it had made her wealthy enough to afford a penthouse in one of the most expensive buildings in Los Angeles. He swiped his key card and entered the code. The door unlocked with a soft click. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark except for the city lights coming through the windows. Terrell found the hallway light switch and flipped it on. Soft white light filled the space. Everything was exactly as he had left it 3 nights ago. Spotless. Perfect. Untouched. The kitchen counter was bare except for a single coffee mug placed upside down on a dish towel. The living room furniture was arranged with geometric precision. The throw pillows on the couch were fluffed and positioned at exact angles. The remote control on the coffee table was aligned parallel to the edge. Terrell set down his supply bag and walked through the apartment, turning on lights as he went. This was part of his routine. Walk through first, make sure everything was as it should be. Check for any messes that needed immediate attention. Look for anything out of place. There was never anything out of place. He started in the kitchen. Wiped down the counters even though they were already clean. Cleaned the sink even though it showed no signs of use. Checked the refrigerator. A bottle of white wine half empty. A container of yogurt. A bag of salad that was starting to wilt. Nothing that suggested actual cooking happened here. Nothing that suggested actual living. Terrell moved to the living room. He vacuumed the carpet in long, even strokes. The vacuum left lines in the pile. He had once cleaned an apartment where the resident made him vacuum in a specific pattern, diagonal lines from corner to corner, because she liked the way it looked. Victoria Reed had never mentioned the pattern. Terrell wasn't sure she had ever noticed. He dusted the shelves. There were no books, no photographs, no personal items, just expensive objects that looked like they belonged in a showroom. A glass sculpture that might have been art or might have been decoration. A crystal vase that had never held flowers. A set of candles that had never been lit. The apartment felt like a hotel room. Temporary, transactional. A place to sleep, but not to live. Terrell finished the living room and moved to the hallway. There were 3 doors. The first led to a guest bedroom that was completely empty except for a desk pushed against one wall. The second led to another guest bedroom that held only a treadmill. The third door at the end of the hall was always closed. The master bedroom, Victoria's bedroom, the one room he wasn't allowed to enter. When he first started this job, his supervisor had explained the rules. Some clients wanted every room cleaned. Others had specific rooms they kept private. Victoria Reed's instructions were explicit. Clean everything except the master bedroom. Don't knock on the door. Don't ask questions. Just do the work and leave. Terrell had followed those rules for 8 months without incident. He had learned not to be curious about the people whose apartments he cleaned. Their lives were none of his business. He was paid to clean, not to care. He cleaned the guest bathroom, scrubbed the sink, wiped the mirror, replaced the hand towels. The trash was empty except for a few wadded tissues at the bottom. He pulled out the liner and tied it shut, carried it to the kitchen and put it in the larger trash bag he would take down with him when he left. The bathroom in the guest bedroom had a faint chemical smell, not cleaning products, something sharper, more acrid. Terrell recognized it but couldn't place it. He made a mental note to check the air vent. Sometimes smells from other apartments drifted through the ventilation system. He was wiping down the bathroom counter when he heard it. A cough, sharp and wet and painful, coming from behind the master bedroom door. Terrell froze. In 8 months, he had barely heard any sounds from that room. Victoria was usually gone when he arrived. The few times she was home, she stayed behind the closed door, silent as a ghost. But this wasn't silent. This was violent. A cough that sounded like it was tearing something loose inside her chest. Terrell set down the cleaning cloth and stood still listening. The cough came again, then again. A fit that went on for nearly a minute. He heard her gasp between coughs, heard the raw desperation in the sound. He told himself it was none of his business. She was an adult, a wealthy, successful adult who had access to the best health care in the city. If she was sick, she would see a doctor. She didn't need her cleaning person getting involved. But the cough didn't stop. It kept going, harsh and relentless, and underneath it, Terrell heard something else. Fear. The kind of fear that came when your body betrayed you and you didn't know how to make it stop. Terrell walked into the hallway and stood in front of the master bedroom door. He raised his hand and knocked lightly. Miss Reed, no answer. Just more coughing. He knocked again, louder this time. Miss Reed, are you okay? The coughing stopped. Silence stretched out for several seconds. Then her voice came through the door, tight and strained. I'm fine. Terrell didn't move. He had heard that tone before. Shanice used to say the same thing near the end. When her lungs were failing and she could barely stand, and she was so tired of being sick that she would rather lie than admit she needed help. I'm fine. Always I'm fine. Do you need water? Victoria's voice came back sharper now. I said I'm fine. Terrell heard movement inside the room. Footsteps. Something being set down hard on the surface. Then the door opened a crack, and Victoria Reed looked out at him. She was younger than he expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore a gray t-shirt and black sweatpants. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes so pronounced they looked like bruises. Her face was pale and drawn. She looked exhausted. She looked sick. Her eyes traveled over him quickly, taking in his height, his dark skin, his uniform. Then she looked away. I'm sorry. Her voice was hoarse, rougher than gravel. I didn't mean to disturb you. Terrell shook his head. You didn't. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine. Just a cough. It happens. She started to close the door, but Terrell spoke before she could. You should drink some water. It helps. Victoria looked at him for a moment. Her expression was unreadable. Guarded. Then she nodded once. Thank you. She closed the door softly. Terrell stood there for a few seconds, staring at the white wood, listening to the silence on the other side. Then he picked up his supplies and went back to work. He finished cleaning the rest of the apartment in silence, emptied the trash, checked that all the lights were off except the one in the entryway, locked the door behind him and took the elevator back down to the lobby. He handed the key card to Marcus and walked out to his car. But he couldn't stop thinking about the cough, about the way Victoria had looked standing in that doorway, trying to hold herself together with sheer force of will, about the fear he had heard underneath the defiance. Terrell drove home through empty streets. The fog had thickened. The city looked like it was dissolving into gray. He thought about Shanice, about the night he found her on the bathroom floor, gasping for air, her lips tinged blue, about the ambulance ride, about the doctor who looked at him with professional sympathy and said there was nothing more they could do. He had asked why. Why now? Why so fast? The doctor had explained that years of smoking had weakened her lungs, that the damage was cumulative, that by the time symptoms became severe, it was often too late. Terrell had wanted to scream, had wanted to punch something, had wanted to demand why Shanice hadn't stopped sooner, why she had promised to quit and then hidden cigarettes in the garage, in her purse, in the pocket of a jacket she never wore. But he hadn't screamed, hadn't punched anything. He had just stood there and nodded and thanked the doctor and walked back to Shanice's room and held her hand while she died. He pulled into his mother's driveway and turned off the engine. Sat in the dark for a long time. The dashboard clock read 6:15. He should go inside, check on Maya, try to sleep for a few hours before he had to take her to school. Instead, he sat there thinking about Victoria Reed's cough, about the sharp chemical smell in the gas bathroom, about the way she had said, I'm fine, like it was a prayer she no longer believed. Over the next 2 weeks, Terrell started noticing things he hadn't noticed before. Small things, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. The mints scattered on the kitchen counter, 5 or 6 of them loose and unwrapped, sitting near the coffee maker. They were always there when he arrived. He threw them away and wiped down the counter. The next night, there were more. The tissues in the guest bathroom trash can, not many, just a few crumpled at the bottom. At first, he thought Victoria had a cold, but a cold didn't last 2 weeks. A cold didn't leave that faint chemical smell lingering in the air. The air purifier near the sliding glass door, small about the size of a shoebox running constantly with a low hum that blended into the background. Terrell had assumed it was for Los Angeles air quality. Smog, pollution. Everyone in the city complained about it. But one night he noticed the filter looked brand new. No dust, no discoloration, pristine. He checked the model number on the side of the machine. During his break, sitting in his car in the underground garage, he looked it up on his phone. The filter was supposed to last 6 months. This one had been replaced recently. Maybe days ago. Terrell started paying closer attention. He noticed that the windows were always open even now that November had turned into December and the temperature dropped into the 40s at night. He noticed that the balcony door was unlocked every time he arrived, even though the building had strict rules about keeping balconies secured for safety reasons. He noticed the bottle of mouthwash in the guest bathroom. Industrial strength, the kind dentists recommended for people with gum disease. It was always there, always half empty, like Victoria was using it constantly. And he noticed the smell, so faint he almost missed it. But once he identified it, he couldn't ignore it. A sharp chemical smell mixed with something burnt. It lingered near the sliding door, near the air purifier, near the open windows. Terrell knew that smell. He had grown up around it. His father had smoked 2 packs a day until he died of a heart attack at 53. His wife had smoked for 20 years before she quit. But by then, the damage was done. The smell had been part of his life for so long that he could recognize it even when someone tried to hide it. Cigarette smoke, covered with mints and mouthwash and air purifiers and open windows, but still there if you knew what to look for. Terrell didn't say anything. It wasn't his place. Victoria Reed was a private person. She had made that clear, and he was just the man who cleaned her apartment. If she wanted to smoke, that was her choice. People made choices. Sometimes those choices killed them slowly. He had learned that the hard way. But the cough kept getting worse. Every time he arrived, he could hear it through the master bedroom door. Sometimes just a few coughs. Sometimes fits that lasted several minutes. The sound of it made his chest tight, made him think about hospital rooms and oxygen masks and the sound of machines that measured the distance between life and death. One night, Terrell was cleaning the secondary balcony. Most residents never went out there. It was small, tucked around the side of the building where the view was worse. Just a narrow space with a single chair and a small metal table. A potted plant sat in the corner, brown and dead from neglect. Terrell swept the floor and wiped down the railing. Then he moved the chair to vacuum underneath it. That was when he saw the plastic bag, folded tightly and shoved behind the outdoor air conditioning unit. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside were cigarette butts, at least 20 of them, maybe more. They were wrapped in tissues stuffed into the bag, tied shut. There was also a small glass ashtray barely bigger than a coaster wiped clean, but still stained with ash. Terrell stared at the bag for a long time. He thought about Shanice, about the way she used to hide her cigarettes in the garage, in the toolbox, in the pocket of an old jacket she never wore, about the way she used to chew gum and spray perfume and open every window in the house trying to make sure no one would know, about the last year of her life when her lungs gave out and she couldn't walk 10 feet without gasping for air. He thought about Victoria Reed coughing behind her bedroom door, hoarse and breathless and alone. Terrell put the bag back where he found it. He finished cleaning the balcony, put his supplies away, locked the door behind him. But he didn't leave. He stood in the hallway outside the penthouse for a long time, staring at the door. He knew what he had to do. He just didn't know if he had the right to do it. Terrell didn't sleep well that night. He went home, checked on Maya, ran his hand gently over her braids as she slept. Then he sat in his mother's kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't drink. He kept thinking about the bag of cigarette butts hidden behind the air conditioning unit. kept hearing the sound of Victoria's cough through the door. He told himself it was not his problem. She was an adult. She made her own choices. He was a cleaning worker, not a doctor, not a friend. He had no right to get involved. But the next night when he arrived at the penthouse, he couldn't stop himself from checking the secondary balcony again. The bag was still there. More butts had been added, fresh ones. He left it alone and went back inside. Victoria was home. He could hear her moving around in the master bedroom. The door was closed as always. He cleaned the kitchen, the living room, the guest bathroom. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting. He was wiping down the glass coffee table when he heard footsteps behind him. Terrell, he turned around. Victoria stood in the hallway wearing a black blazer and dark jeans. She looked like she had just come back from somewhere. Her hair was down and she had makeup on, but it didn't hide the exhaustion in her face. The shadows under her eyes had deepened. Her cheekbones stood out sharp as knives. "Miss Reed," Terrell set down the cleaning cloth. "I didn't know you were home. I got back a few minutes ago." Her voice was still hoarse. "I wanted to talk to you." Terrell felt his stomach tighten. He wondered if she had noticed him looking at the balcony, if she knew he had found the cigarettes. "Is everything okay?" Victoria crossed her arms. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't used to having conversations like this. "I wanted to apologize. For the other night. I know I was rude when you knocked on my door." Terrell shook his head. "You weren't rude. I was. You were just trying to help, and I shut you down. That wasn't fair. You don't owe me an apology. I'm just the guy who cleans your apartment." Victoria looked at him for a moment, then glanced away. "Still, I appreciate what you do. I know I don't say that enough." She turned and walked back toward her bedroom. Terrell watched her go. There was something in her voice, something that sounded like guilt, like she was apologizing for more than just being rude. He picked up the cleaning cloth and went back to work. But the conversation stayed with him. The way she had looked at him, the way she had said, "I appreciate what you do," like those words cost her something. 3 nights later, Terrell saw her again. This time she was sitting on the main balcony when he arrived. The sliding door was open. He could see her silhouette against the city lights. She sat in a chair, her back to him, staring out at the skyline. Terrell hesitated at the door, then he knocked lightly on the frame. Victoria turned her head. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I can come back later." "No, it's fine." Victoria stood and walked inside, closing the door behind her. "I was just getting some air." She moved past him into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the glass to her lips. Terrell set down his vacuum and looked at her. "Are you feeling all right?" Victoria set the glass down on the counter. She looked at him. For a moment, he thought she might tell him the truth. But then she smiled, and the moment was gone. "I'm fine, just tired. Work has been busy." Terrell nodded slowly. He didn't believe her, but he didn't push. Victoria picked up her glass and walked back toward her bedroom. She stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. "Thank you for asking." Then she closed the door. Terrell stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. He thought about Shanice again, about the way she used to lie to him even when he knew the truth, about the way he used to let her because it was easier than forcing her to admit she was dying. He thought about Victoria Reed standing in her kitchen with a glass of water, pretending she was fine. And he thought about the bag of cigarettes still hidden on the balcony, growing fuller every night. Maya had a school project due, something about the solar system. She sat at his mother's kitchen table, surrounded by poster board and markers and printouts about planets that Terrell had helped her find at the library. His mother had gone to bed an hour ago. Terrell sat across from Maya drinking his third cup of coffee, watching her carefully color in Jupiter's red spot. "Dad, does Mars really have water?" "Scientists think so. They found ice near the poles. Could people live there? Maybe someday, if they figure out how to make it safe." Maya looked up at him. Her eyes were the same deep brown as his, same as Shanice's had been. "Would you want to live on Mars?" Terrell thought about it. "No, I like Earth, even with all the bad stuff, especially with all the bad stuff. That's what makes the good stuff matter." Maya went back to coloring. Terrell watched her, feeling the ache in his chest that never fully went away. She looked so much like her mother, acted like her too, the same fierce determination, the same refusal to give up even when things got hard. Shanice had been like that until the very end, fighting, refusing to admit defeat. Even when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, she had insisted she would get better, that she just needed more time, that next week, next month, she would be strong enough to come home. She never came home. Terrell had brought Maya to the hospital every day for those last 6 months, had let her sit on Shanice's bed and tell her about school, about friends, about the chapter book she was reading. Shanice had smiled and asked questions and pretended she wasn't dying. And Maya had believed her, because children believe their parents when they said everything would be okay. The day Shanice died, Maya had been at school. Terrell got the call at work. He left immediately, drove to the hospital, held Shanice's hand as she took her last breath. She was unconscious by then, drugged with morphine to ease the pain. She didn't know he was there, didn't know it was the end. Terrell had to pick Maya up from school and tell her, had to watch her face crumple, had to hold her while she cried, had to answer her questions even though he didn't have answers. Why did Mom die? Why didn't the doctor save her? Why didn't you tell me she was getting worse? He had tried to explain, had tried to make her understand. But how do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes people make choices that hurt them, and by the time they realize it, it's too late to undo the damage? Dad, Terrell blinked. Maya was looking at him. Are you okay? Yeah, baby, I'm fine. You look sad, just thinking. About Mom? Terrell reached across the table and took her hand. Yeah, about Mom. Maya squeezed his hand. I miss her. I miss her too. They sat like them for a moment. Then Maya pulled her hand back and picked up her marker. Can you help me with Saturn's rings? Of course. Terrell moved his chair around the table and sat next to her. Together they worked on the project until Maya's eyes started to droop. He carried her to bed, pulled the blankets up to her chin, kissed her forehead. Then he stood in the doorway watching her sleep, thinking about all the ways you could love someone and still lose them. The next night, Terrell made a decision. He arrived at the penthouse at his usual time. Victoria was not home. He cleaned the kitchen, the living room, the hallways. Then he walked out to the secondary balcony and stood in front of the air conditioning unit. He pulled out the plastic bag and held it in his hands. He could throw it away, pretend he never saw it, go back to his routine and let Victoria Reed handle her own life. But he didn't. He put the bag back where he found it, went back inside, and waited. Victoria came home around midnight. Terrell heard the front door open, heard her footsteps in the hallway. He was in the guest bathroom scrubbing the sink. He set down the sponge, dried his hands, walked out into the hallway. Victoria was standing near the kitchen, setting down her purse. She looked surprised to see him. Terrell, I thought you'd be gone by now. I wanted to talk to you. Victoria's expression shifted. She looked guarded. About what Terrell took a breath. He had rehearsed this in his head a dozen times. But now that he was standing in front of her, the words felt clumsy and intrusive. I found something. On the balcony. The small one around the side. Victoria's face went pale. She didn't say anything. I wasn't snooping. I was just cleaning, and I moved the chair, and I saw the bag. Victoria stared at him. Her jaw tightened. You had no right to go through my things. I didn't go through anything. I found it by accident. But once I did, I couldn't just ignore it. Victoria crossed her arms. Her voice was cold now, defensive. So what? You're going to lecture me? Tell me how bad smoking is for my health. No, I'm not here to lecture you. Then what do you want? Terrell looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the shame she was trying to hide behind anger. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Her lungs gave out. She smoked for 20 years. By the time she tried to quit, it was too late. I watched her spend the last 6 months of her life struggling to breathe. I watched her die in a hospital bed gasping for air. Victoria's expression softened. The anger faded, replaced by something fragile. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I recognize the signs. The cough, the mints, the air purifier, the mouthwash. You're trying to hide it. I get that. But the symptoms you're having, the shortness of breath, the dizziness, I've seen them before. Victoria looked away. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. It's not that simple. I know. I'm not saying it is. Victoria was quiet for a long time. Then she walked over to the couch and sat down. She looked small, sitting there in her expensive apartment, surrounded by all her success. Do you know what people would say if they found out? Her voice was shaking now. If they knew I smoked. Terrell sat down in the chair across from her. They'd judge me. They'd say I was weak, undisciplined, hypocritical. I run a company that makes software for hospitals. I give talks about health and wellness and productivity. And I can't even stop smoking. She let out a bitter laugh. I've tried so many times. But every time I quit, I fall apart. I can't sleep. I can't focus. I can't handle the pressure. So I go back to it. And I tell myself I'll quit later, when things calm down. When I'm not so stressed. She looked at Terrell. Her eyes were wet. But things never calm down. And I'm so tired of pretending I have everything under control. Terrell didn't say anything. He just sat there letting her talk. I know it's killing me. I know I'm not fine. But if I admit that if I ask for help, everyone will know I'm a fraud. They'll know I'm not who they think I am. You're not a fraud. You're just human. Victoria shook her head. You don't understand. My whole life is built on this image. If that falls apart, everything falls apart. Terrell leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm not going to tell anyone. That's not why I'm here. I just wanted you to know that I see what's happening. And if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here. Victoria looked at him. For the first time since he had met her, she looked like she believed him. Why do you care? Terrell thought about Shanice. About the nights he spent sitting beside her hospital bed, wishing he had said something sooner. Wishing he had pushed harder. Because I didn't say anything last time. And I've regretted it every day since. Victoria wiped her eyes. She didn't say anything. But she nodded. Terrell stood up and picked up his cleaning supplies. I'll finish up and get out of your way. He walked toward the kitchen. But Victoria's voice stopped him. Terrell, he turned around. Thank you. Terrell nodded, then he went back to work. Over the next week, things were different. Victoria didn't avoid him anymore. She started leaving her bedroom door open. She made small talk when he arrived, asked him about his daughter, about his life outside of work. Terrell answered her questions, but he didn't push. He didn't bring up the cigarettes again. He just did his job and let her know he was there if she needed him. But the cough didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. One night, Terrell arrived to find Victoria sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard him come in. The exhaustion was written all over her face. Bad day, Victoria let out a long breath. Bad week. Terrell set down his supplies and sat down across from her. You want to talk about it? Victoria shook her head. Not really. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Victoria spoke. I went to the doctor yesterday. They ran tests, blood work, lung function, everything. Terrell waited. They said I'm fine. Physically, there's nothing wrong with me. The dizziness, the shortness of breath, it's all stress apparently. They told me to exercise more, meditate, take a vacation. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. They don't know about the smoking. I didn't tell them. Terrell looked at her. Why not? Because then it would be real. If I tell them, it goes in my medical records. It becomes part of my history, and I can't let that happen. Terrell didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her that her health was more important than her image, that hiding the truth was only going to make things worse. But he knew she already knew that. She didn't need him to tell her. I'm scared. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if I stop, I won't be able to function. And I'm scared that if I don't stop, I'm going to end up like your wife. Terrell felt a tightness in his chest. He thought about the hospital, about the machines, about the way Shanice looked at him in those final days like she was sorry for everything. You're not going to end up like her. Not if you do something about it now. Victoria looked at him. How do I do that? One step at a time. You don't have to quit tomorrow. You don't have to tell the world. You just have to be honest with yourself. And maybe with one other person. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again. She looked down at her hands. I don't know if I can. You can. I've seen you run a company. I've seen you give speeches. I've seen you hold it together when everything around you is falling apart. You're stronger than you think. Victoria wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. What if I fail? Then you try again. That's all any of us can do. 2 nights later, everything fell apart. Terrell arrived at the penthouse to find the lights off. He let himself in and turned on the hallway light. The apartment was silent. Too silent. He called out, Miss Reed. No answer. He walked through the living room, the kitchen, checking the rooms. She was not there. Then he heard it. A faint sound coming from the elevator lobby. Terrell ran out into the hallway and found Victoria sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. She was gasping for air. Her face was pale and slick with sweat. Her hands were shaking. Victoria. Terrell dropped to his knees beside her. What happened? I can't breathe. Victoria's voice came out in a whisper. I can't. Her voice broke off as another fit of coughing took over. Her whole body convulsed with it. Terrell pulled out his phone ready to call 911, but Victoria grabbed his wrist. No, no ambulance, please. You need help, not like this. Not here. Please, Terrell looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, the shame, the desperation. He thought about calling anyway, about ignoring her protest and doing what needed to be done. But something in her face stopped him. She wasn't just afraid of dying, she was afraid of being exposed. He put his phone away and helped her to her feet. Come on, let's get you inside. He guided her back into the penthouse and sat her down on the couch. He got her a glass of water, made her drink it slowly. He stayed with her until her breathing steadied, until the color came back to her face. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were red and swollen. I thought I was going to die. Terrell sat down beside her. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Victoria shook her head. I can't keep doing this. I know. She looked at him. He saw something break in her expression. All the walls she had built up, all the control she had clung to, it crumbled. I need help. Her voice was barely audible. Terrell reached out and took her hand. Then let me help you. The next morning, Terrell came back to the penthouse. He had not slept. He went home after Victoria finally fell asleep on the couch, curled into herself like a child, her breathing ragged but steady. He showered, changed clothes, dropped Maya at school early, kissing her forehead twice instead of once, holding on a little longer than usual. She asked if he was okay. He told her yes. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He stopped at the coffee shop on Wilshire, the one his mother used to take him to after church when he was young. The same faded awning, the same cracked tile floor. The barista recognized him, nodded, started making his usual order without asking. Terrell ordered a second cup, black coffee, no sugar. The way Victoria had drunk hers the few times he'd seen her in the kitchen. He knocked on the penthouse door at 9, son. Victoria opened it almost immediately. She wore the same clothes from last night. Her hair was still in the same ponytail strands falling loose around her face. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked like she hadn't moved from the couch. I didn't think you'd come back. Victoria stepped aside to let him in. I told you I would. Terrell walked to the kitchen table and set down both cups. Victoria followed. She wrapped her hands around the coffee but didn't drink. Her fingers were trembling. Not the shake of caffeine or cold. Something deeper. Something that lived in her bones now. I don't know where to start. You don't have to start anywhere. We can just sit here if that's what you need. Victoria looked at him. Her eyes were glassy with exhaustion and something that looked like disbelief. You should have called 911 last night. I could have died, but you didn't. You don't know that. You're not a doctor. You're not qualified to make that call. Terrell nodded. You're right, I'm not. But you asked me not to, and I listened. If that was the wrong choice, then I'm sorry. Victoria looked down at her coffee. The sharpness drained from her voice. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you. You were just trying to help. You don't have to apologize. You're scared. I get it. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then the words started coming slow at first, then faster like a dam breaking. I've been smoking since I was 19. Started in college. Everyone did it back then. Just something you did at parties. When you were stressed. When you needed a break. I told myself I'd quit after graduation. Then I told myself I'd quit after I got my first job. Then after I started my company. But I never did. She finally lifted the coffee to her lips, took a small sip, grimaced. It got worse when the company took off. The pressure was constant. Board meetings, investor calls, product launches. I couldn't afford to fall apart. So I smoked to keep myself steady. It became the only thing that made me feel like I could breathe. Terrell listened without interrupting. He knew this story. Different details, same shape. Shanice had told him something similar once years ago after her first attempt to quit failed. I know how stupid that sounds. Smoking to feel like I can breathe. But it's true. When I don't have it, I feel like I'm drowning. like everything is spinning out of control. It's not stupid. It's addiction. That's how it works. Victoria set the coffee down. How did your wife quit? Terrell felt the familiar ache settle in his chest. She didn't. Not really. She stopped smoking when the doctors told her she had to. But by then it was too late. The damage was done. Victoria's face crumpled. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. It's okay, I want to talk about it. I want you to understand what happens if you don't stop. He leaned forward. She spent the last 6 months of her life hooked up to oxygen. Couldn't walk across the room without getting winded. Couldn't play with our daughter. Couldn't do anything. And the worst part was watching her realize that she had done it to herself. That if she had just stopped sooner, she might have had more time. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She didn't wipe them away this time. I don't want that to be you. I don't want you to look back in 5 years and realize you could have done something. Because you can. Right now, you still have time. Victoria took a shaky breath. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, but you don't have to do it alone. Victoria looked at him. For the first time, she looked like she believed him. The first 3 days were the hardest. Terrell came to the penthouse during the day instead of at night. Victoria had taken time off from work, told her assistant she was dealing with a personal matter, needed space, didn't elaborate. Her assistant had sounded concerned on the phone asking if everything was all right, if there was anything she could do. Victoria had thanked her and ended the call. Terrell didn't clean during those visits. He just sat with her. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. He brought her water when she needed it, stayed with her when the cravings got bad. Victoria was restless, pacing the apartment like a caged animal. She would sit for 5 minutes, then stand, walk to the window, walk back, sit again. Her hands never stopped moving, fingers drumming on her thighs, picking at the hem of her shirt, rubbing her temples. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Victoria sat on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest. It was day 2, 48 hours since her last cigarette. She looked worse than she had in the elevator lobby. Her skin had a grayish tint. Her lips were dry and cracked. She hadn't showered, hadn't changed clothes. It gets easier. Not right away, but it does. How long did it take? Your wife Terrell thought back. A few weeks before the physical symptoms eased up. A few months before she stopped thinking about it all the time. Victoria let out a bitter laugh. A few months, oh great, I know it feels impossible right now. But you're doing it. You haven't smoked in 2 days, that's something. 2 days doesn't mean anything if I go back to it tomorrow. Then don't go back to it tomorrow. Just focus on today. Victoria wrapped her arms around her knees and stared out the window. The afternoon sun cut across the hardwood floors in sharp angles. Dust motes floated in the light. Everything was too bright, too loud. Her senses felt raw, exposed. The cravings came in waves. Sometimes gentle, like a whisper in the back of her mind. Sometimes violent, crashing over her with such force that she couldn't think about anything else. She would sit there gripping the couch cushions, willing herself not to stand up and walk to the balcony where she knew there were more cigarettes hidden. Because there were. She hadn't told Terrell that she had a backup pack. Hadn't told him about the carton in the storage unit downstairs. Hadn't told him about the convenience store 2 blocks away where the cashier knew her by sight. On day 3, she snapped at him. He had asked if she wanted tea. Just a simple question. But something about the way he said it, the kindness in his voice, the patience made her want to scream. I don't want tea. I don't want water. I don't want you sitting here watching me like I'm some kind of science experiment. Terrell didn't react. He just nodded. Okay. Victoria stood up, paced to the kitchen, paced back. Why are you even here? Don't you have work? Don't you have your own life? I do, and I'm choosing to be here. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Because I know what happens if I'm not. Victoria stopped pacing. She looked at him, saw the truth in his face. He wasn't here out of pity. He was here out of guilt. Out of the knowledge that he hadn't done enough the first time, and this was his chance to make it right. I'm sorry. Her voice was smaller now. I know you're trying to help. I don't know how to do this. Terrell stood up and walked over to her. You don't have to know. You just have to keep going. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. Her body felt wrong. Too hot then, too cold. Her heart raced for no reason. Her skin itched. She got up and walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked like a stranger. Hollow, haunted, desperate. She walked out to the living room, stood at the sliding glass door. The city glittered below, indifferent to her suffering. She thought about opening the door, walking to the balcony. Just one cigarette. One wouldn't hurt. She could quit again tomorrow. Start over. This time would be different. Her hand was on the door handle when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from Terrell. Can't sleep either. You're doing great. Keep going. Victoria's hand fell away from the door. She picked up her phone and stared at the message. How did he know? Was he watching the building somehow? Or did he just understand from experience what 3 in the morning felt like when you were trying to quit something that had become part of you? She didn't reply, just set the phone down and walked back to her bedroom, closed the door, got back into bed, and lay there until the sun came up. Day 4, day 5, day 6. The hours blurred together. Terrell came every afternoon, brought her food she barely touched, sat with her through the worst of the cravings, didn't judge when she cried, didn't flinch when she yelled, just stayed. Victoria found herself talking to him in ways she hadn't talked to anyone in years. About the pressure of running a company, about the board members who questioned every decision she made, about the investors who expected constant growth, constant innovation, constant perfection, about the speaking engagements where she stood on stage and talked about efficiency and optimization and work-life balance while knowing her own life was falling apart. I built this entire persona, this version of myself that has everything figured out, and now I'm trapped inside it. Victoria sat on the floor, her back against the couch. Day 7. The worst of the physical symptoms had started to ease. The shaking had stopped. The nausea had faded, but the mental fog remained. The exhaustion that lived in her bones. What happens if people find out? If they know I've been lying this whole time? You haven't been lying. You've been surviving. Same thing, it's not. Terrell sat across from her, his back against the wall. They had fallen into this pattern, sitting on the floor instead of the furniture. Something about the floor felt safer, more honest. People respect authenticity more than perfection. They want to know you're human. Easy to say when you're not the one who has to face them. You're right. It's your choice whether to tell anyone. But keeping secrets takes energy. Energy you might need for other things. Victoria pulled her knees up to her chest. She thought about the press, about the headlines. Tech CEO admits to smoking habit. Health software founder struggles with addiction. The think pieces, the hot takes, the judgment. I can't, not yet, maybe not ever. Terrell nodded. That's okay too. On day 8, Victoria broke. She woke up feeling different. Not better, worse. The fog had lifted enough that she could think clearly for the first time in a week. And thinking clearly meant understanding exactly what she had given up. The one thing that had gotten her through every crisis, every failure, every moment of doubt. She got dressed, real clothes, jeans, a sweater, put on shoes for the first time in days, walked out of the building. The doorman smiled at her. She didn't smile back. Walked 2 blocks to the convenience store, the same one she always went to when she ran out. The cashier looked up when she walked in. A young guy, maybe 25, with a sleeve of tattoos and a bored expression. Haven't seen you in a while. Victoria didn't respond, just walked to the counter. The usual. She nodded. He grabbed a pack from behind the counter. Set it down. She paid Guacao, walked out without meeting his eyes. Back at the building, she took the elevator up to the 42nd floor, walked into her apartment, stood in the entryway holding the pack in her hands. The cellophane crinkled under her fingers. She could feel the weight of the cigarettes inside. 20 of them. Enough to last a few days if she rationed them. Enough to make the noise in her head stop. She walked out to the secondary balcony, the small one where Terrell had found the bag of butts weeks ago, sat down in the metal chair, set the pack on the table in front of her, and stared at it. 2 hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The traffic noise from the street below became white noise. Victoria sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the pack of cigarettes, her mind at war with itself. One voice said, You've made it 8 days. Don't throw that away. Keep going. You're stronger than this. Another voice said, 8 days means nothing. You'll fail eventually. Everyone does. Why suffer for no reason? Just smoke. Just one. Just enough to take the edge off. Back and forth. Over and over. The same argument she'd had with herself 100 times before. The argument she always lost. But this time felt different. This time she could see both paths clearly. One led back to the hospital, to the oxygen mask, to the machines measuring her decline. The other led somewhere unknown, somewhere terrifying, somewhere free. She reached out and picked up the pack, held it in her palm. It felt heavier than it should, like it contained more than tobacco and paper, like it contained every choice she'd made that led her to this moment. Victoria stood up, walked to the railing, looked down at the street 42 stories below. Cars moving like insects, people like specks of dust. From this height, everything looked insignificant. Everyone's problems small and distant and meaningless. But hers didn't feel meaningless. Hers felt like they were crushing her. She thought about Terrell, about the way he sat with her day after day asking nothing in return, about his wife dying in a hospital bed regretting every cigarette, about Maya, who Terrell had told her about during one of their long conversations. A 9-year-old girl who had already lost her mother and deserved a father who didn't work himself to death trying to save someone else's. Victoria looked at the pack in her hand. Then she threw it over the railing. It tumbled through the air, spinning, catching the light. She watched it fall, watched it disappear into the traffic below. Gone. Irretrievable. Final. Something broke open inside her chest. Not relief, not triumph, just raw, overwhelming grief. For all the years she'd wasted, for all the lies she'd told, for the person she could have been if she hadn't been so afraid. She turned around. Terrell was standing in the doorway. She hadn't heard him arrive, hadn't heard the door open. He must have let himself in with his key. His face showed nothing. No surprise, no judgment, just steady, quiet presence. I don't want to die. The words came out broken, desperate. Victoria covered her face with her hands and let herself cry. Really cry. Not the controlled tears she'd allowed herself in private. Not the careful sadness she'd performed when appropriate. This was something else. Something that came from a place she'd kept locked for years. Terrell walked over to her, stood beside her, didn't touch her, didn't try to fix it, just stayed. Victoria cried until there was nothing left, until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen and her body felt hollowed out. She cried for the girl she'd been at 19 who started smoking because everyone else did, for the woman she'd become at 35 who couldn't stop, for every moment in between when she could have chosen differently, but didn't. When she finally lowered her hands, the sun was setting, pink and orange spreading across the horizon. The same colors as every other sunset, but somehow different, somehow new. I'm sorry, Victoria's voice was hoarse. For what? For falling apart. Terrell shook his head. You're not falling apart. You're letting yourself feel something real for the first time in years. That's not weakness. That's courage. Victoria looked at him. His face was backlit by the sunset, his features in shadow. But she could see his eyes, steady, certain, believing in her even when she didn't believe in herself. What happens now? Now we keep going, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time if we have to. Victoria nodded. She felt exhausted, emptied out. But underneath the exhaustion, something else stirred, something that might have been hope. They walked back inside together. Terrell made tea. Victoria drank it. They sat at the kitchen table in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the city lights began to glow. After that night, things shifted. The cravings were still there, but they were less intense, less consuming. Victoria started sleeping better. Not great, but better. 3 hours, then 4, then 5. The fog in her head began to clear. Her hands stopped shaking. The cough that had plagued her for months started to fade. Terrell still came by a few times a week, but the visits were shorter now. Victoria didn't need him to sit with her all day anymore. She was finding her footing, learning to exist in this new reality where cigarettes weren't an option, where she had to face stress and pressure and fear without a chemical buffer. It wasn't easy. Some days she wanted to quit quitting. wanted to say it wasn't worth it. But then she would remember the weight of that pack in her hand, remember the feeling of watching it fall, remember that she had chosen life over comfort. And she would keep going. She started going outside again. Real outside, not just the balcony. Walked to the coffee shop Terrell liked, ordered black coffee, sat by the window watching people pass by. She felt visible in a way she hadn't in years, like she was part of the world instead of floating above it in her penthouse, disconnected and alone. One afternoon, she opened her laptop, looked at the 83 unread emails that had become 217, started responding, slowly at first, then faster. Her mind was clearer now, sharper. She could focus in ways she hadn't been able to before. Her assistant called, surprised to hear from her, asked how she was doing. Victoria considered lying, considered saying she was fine, that it was just a personal matter that had been resolved. But something stopped her. I needed to deal with some health issues. I'm better now. I'll be back in the office next week. Her assistant asked if she needed anything. Victoria said no. They ended the call. It wasn't the full truth, but it was closer than she'd ever come before. That evening, Terrell knocked on her door. She opened it smiling. First genuine smile she'd given anyone in months. You look different. Different how, like you're here. Really here. Victoria stepped aside to let him in. He noticed the laptop open on the dining table, the coffee cup beside it, the traces of life returning to the sterile space. Getting back to work slowly, easing into it. Terrell nodded his approval. That's good. You need structure. Purpose, something to focus on besides the cravings. Victoria walked to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, handed one to Terrell. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me. I do. You saved my life. Terrell shook his head. You saved your own life. I just sat with you while you did it. Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that she never could have done this alone. But she saw the look in his eyes, the look that said he didn't want gratitude, didn't want credit, just wanted to know that this time he had said something when it mattered. How many days has it been? 11. Victoria set down her glass. 11 days since I threw that pack over the balcony. Feels like longer. Feels like a completely different life. That's because it is. You're not the same person you were 11 days ago. Victoria thought about that. About the woman who had stood on the balcony 2 hours unable to make a decision. About the woman who had cried in front of another person for the first time in years. About the woman who was learning to live without the things she thought she couldn't live without. No, I'm not. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Victoria went back to the office on a Thursday morning, not a Monday. Mondays felt too symbolic, too much like a fresh start that demanded perfection. Thursday was ordinary, unremarkable, a day that didn't carry expectations. She walked into the building at 9:15. The receptionist looked up, surprise flickering across her face before she smoothed it into a professional smile. Miss Reed, welcome back. Victoria nodded and kept walking, took the elevator to the 12th floor. Her office was in the corner, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. Her assistant, Jennifer, was already at her desk outside the office door. She stood when Victoria approached. I didn't know you were coming in today. Last-minute decision. Jennifer's eyes scanned her face, looking for signs of whatever personal matter had kept Victoria away for a month. Victoria knew what she was seeing, the weight loss, the shadows under her eyes that were fading but still present, the tension in her shoulders that came from being in a room full of people who would ask questions she didn't want to answer. Should I clear your calendar for today? Give you time to catch up? No. What's scheduled? Jennifer glanced at her tablet. Team meeting at 10, budget review at 2, conference call with the hospital systems division at 4. Keep them all. I'm here to work. Victoria walked into her office and closed the door, stood there for a moment breathing. The space looked exactly as she'd left it. Laptop on the desk, papers filed in neat stacks, a framed photo of herself accepting an award at some tech conference 3 years ago. She looked at the photo, at the woman smiling confidently for the camera. That woman felt like a stranger. Victoria sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. 463 unread emails. She started reading, responding, making decisions. Her mind felt sharper than it had in months. Years, maybe. Without the constant fog of nicotine and withdrawal, she could think clearly, could see problems and solutions with a precision she'd forgotten she possessed. The team meeting was awkward. 10 people sitting around a conference table trying not to stare at her, trying not to ask where she'd been. Victoria addressed it directly. I took some time off to deal with a health issue. I'm fine now. Let's talk about Q4 projections. The relief in the room was palpable. They wanted to believe her, wanted to go back to normal. So they did. They talked about projections and timelines and product launches. Victoria contributed, asked questions, made suggestions. Slowly the tension eased. By the end of the meeting, it almost felt like she'd never left. Almost. She made it through the day, through the budget review where the CFO expressed concerns about their burn rate, through the conference call where a hospital administrator complained about bugs in their latest software update, through all of it without reaching for something that wasn't there, without feeling the phantom weight of a cigarette between her fingers. When she finally left the office at 6, she felt exhausted, but good, proud, like she'd climbed a mountain and lived to tell about it. Terrell texted her that night. How'd it go? Better than expected. Hard, but good. Proud of you. Victoria stared at those 3 words for a long time. No one had said that to her in years. Not her board, not her investors, not her mother who called once a week from Connecticut to ask about her love life and expressed disappointment at the lack thereof. Proud of you. Simple words that meant everything. Thank you for believing I could do it. Never doubted it. Victoria set down her phone and walked to the window. The city stretched out below. Millions of people living their lives, some thriving, some struggling, some barely surviving. She used to look at this view and feel separate from all of it, above it. Now she felt part of it, connected in a way she hadn't been before. The weeks blurred into months. Victoria fell into a new rhythm, work during the day, evenings spent catching up on everything she'd missed. Nights that were still hard, still filled with moments when the cravings hit like waves but manageable, survivable. Terrell went back to his regular schedule, cleaning at night, coming by the penthouse every few days but not to sit with her anymore, just to do his job. They would exchange a few words. How are you doing? Good. You? Good. Small talk that carried weight because of everything underneath it. Maya asked about the lady in the fancy building. Terrell had mentioned Victoria once in passing when Maya asked why he'd been going to work during the day for a few weeks. He'd said he was helping someone. Maya wanted to know who. Terrell kept it vague. Just someone who needed a friend. Can I meet her? Maybe someday. Does she have kids? No. That's sad. Everyone should have kids. Terrell smiled and kissed the top of her head. Not everyone wants kids, baby. Why not? Kids are great. You're right. Kids are great. 3 months after Victoria threw the cigarettes over the balcony, she received an invitation to speak at a health and wellness conference in San Francisco. The organizers had been trying to book her for 2 years. She'd always declined. Too busy, too much on her plate, too many other commitments. This time she said yes. Jennifer looked surprised when Victoria told her, "Are you sure your schedule is already packed for that week? Move things around. This is important." Jennifer made notes on her tablet. "What do you want to speak about?" They were asking for a topic. Victoria thought about it. Mental health in high-pressure environments. Jennifer's fingers paused over the screen. That's different from your usual topics, I know, but it's what I want to talk about. The conference was in 6 weeks. Victoria started preparing. Writing notes, outlining key points, but every time she sat down to work on it, the words felt hollow. She was talking around the truth instead of speaking it, creating another version of the perfect, composed CEO who had everything figured out. She called Terrell one night. It was late, past midnight. She knew he was working, but she needed to hear his voice. "Did I wake you? I'm at work. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm supposed to give this talk in San Francisco about mental health and pressure and asking for help. And I don't know how to do it without lying." Terrell was quiet for a moment. "Then don't lie. If I tell the truth, everyone will know. Would that be so bad?" "Yes. No, I don't know." Victoria sat on her couch and the dark phone pressed to her ear. "What if I tell them and they use it against me? What if the board loses confidence? What if investors pull out? What if it destroys everything I've built? Or what if it helps someone else who's struggling? What if it makes you more human instead of less powerful?" Victoria closed her eyes. I'm scared, I know. But you've already done the hardest part. Everything else is just details. They talked for another 20 minutes about fear, about truth, about the cost of keeping secrets. When they hung up, Victoria sat in the dark for a long time thinking. 2 weeks before the conference, Victoria called an emergency board meeting. 8 people sitting around a table confused about why they'd been summoned on short notice. Victoria stood at the head of the table. She'd prepared remarks, written them out, rehearsed them. But now that she was standing there looking at their faces, the prepared words felt wrong. She spoke from memory instead. I've been lying to all of you. Not about business. The company is fine. Our numbers are strong. But I've been lying about myself. About why I took time off last month. About whether I'm actually okay. The room was silent. Victoria saw concern, confusion, worry. She kept going. I've been struggling with an addiction for years. I hid it because I was ashamed, because I thought it made me weak, because I was terrified of what you'd think if you knew. But hiding it almost killed me. And I realized that I can't keep doing this, can't keep pretending to be perfect when I'm not. She told them about the smoking, about the withdrawal, about Terrell, though she didn't use his name, about the night she almost died in the hallway because she was too proud to admit she needed help. She told them everything. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Then David Chen, the longest-serving board member, spoke. How long has it been since you quit? 3 months. 12 weeks. 84 days. David nodded slowly. My sister struggled with the same thing. Smoked for 30 years. Finally quit when she got pregnant with her first kid. Hardest thing she ever did. She said the first few months were hell. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. Yeah, that sounds about right. Susan Martinez, the board member who usually questioned Victoria's every decision, leaned forward. Why are you telling us this now? Because I'm speaking at a conference in 2 weeks about mental health. And I can't stand on that stage and talk about asking for help if I'm still hiding the truth from the people I work with every day. Susan studied her face. What do you need from us? Victoria hadn't expected that question. I need you to know, and I need you to hold me accountable. If I start showing signs of stress that look like I might relapse, I need you to call it out. We can do that. The rest of the meeting was practical. Discussion about whether this needed to be disclosed publicly, whether it affected her ability to lead, whether the investors needed to know. The consensus was careful. Private health matters remained private unless they impacted performance. Victoria's performance had been strong. If anything, it had improved in the last month. They ended the meeting with a commitment. Victoria would continue as CEO. The board would support her. And if she ever needed to take time off again for any reason, she wouldn't have to lie about it. Victoria walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than she had in years. San Francisco was cold. Fog rolling in from the bay, wrapping the city in gray. Victoria checked into the hotel the night before her talk. Couldn't sleep. Paced the room. Went over her notes for the 100th time. Thought about calling Terrell, but decided against it. This was something she had to do alone. The conference was held in a massive convention center. Thousands of people, breakout sessions on everything from nutrition to mindfulness to workplace wellness. Victoria's talk was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Main stage. She stood backstage listening to the moderator introduce her, reciting her credentials, her achievements, the impressive trajectory of her career. Then she walked out into the lights. The audience was huge. Hundreds of people filling the auditorium. Victoria stood at the podium and looked out at them, saw their faces, saw their expectations, saw them waiting for her to deliver some polished presentation about optimization and efficiency. She deviated from her script in the first sentence. I'm supposed to talk to you today about managing stress in high-pressure environments, about strategies for maintaining mental health while building a career, and I will talk about those things. But first, I need to tell you that I almost died 4 months ago. The audience shifted, leaned forward. She had their attention, not from an accident, not from a disease, from the weight of trying to be perfect, from the exhaustion of maintaining an image that didn't match reality, from the shame of struggling with something I thought made me weak. She told them about the smoking, about hiding it for years, about the symptoms she ignored, about the night she collapsed in a hallway gasping for air, too afraid to call for help because she didn't want anyone to know the truth. She told them about Terrell, though she still didn't use his name, about the stranger who saw past her walls, who refused to look away, who sat with her through the hardest weeks of her life and asked for nothing in return. She talked about withdrawal, about cravings, about the morning she bought cigarettes and sat on her balcony for 2 hours before throwing them away, about the grief that came with letting go of something that had been her crutch for so long. And she talked about recovery, about the slow, painful process of learning to exist without the things she thought she needed, about the clarity that came when the fog lifted, about the strength she found when she finally admitted she wasn't strong enough to do it alone. The people in the audience were absolutely silent. Some had tears on their faces. Victoria saw them and felt something shift inside her. This was why she'd said yes to the talk, not to perform perfection, but to offer truth, to show them that struggle didn't disqualify you from success, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that survival sometimes meant letting someone else see the parts of you that you'd spent your whole life hiding. She finished her prepared remarks and opened the floor to questions. Hands shot up across the auditorium. The moderator pointed to a woman in the third row. The woman stood microphone in hand. "What was the hardest thing you've ever done?" Victoria didn't hesitate, admitting I needed help, and then actually accepting them. The woman nodded and sat down. More hands, more questions. Victoria answered all of them honestly, didn't deflect, didn't hedge, just told the truth as clearly as she knew how. When the session ended, people swarmed the stage, wanting to talk, wanting to share their own stories. A man told her about his brother who died from alcoholism because he was too proud to go to rehab. A woman told her about quitting pills after a decade of dependence. A young guy, maybe 25, told her he had been thinking about asking for help with his anxiety, but was afraid it would hurt his career. Victoria told him to ask, told him his career would survive. His life might not. She stayed for 2 hours, talking, listening, connecting with people who understood what it meant to struggle in silence. When she finally made it back to her hotel room, she was exhausted, but something felt complete. Her phone had 17 missed calls, 32 texts, most from Jennifer, some from board members, one from her mother. She scrolled through them. Everyone wanted to know if she was okay, if she'd really said what people were saying, she said, if she needed anything. Victoria responded to Jennifer first. "I'm fine, better than fine, talk tomorrow." Then she opened the text from Terrell. It had come in during her talk. "Maya and I are watching the live stream. You're doing great. Keep going." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't known the conference was live streaming, hadn't thought about who might be watching. The fact that Terrell had tuned in with his daughter meant more than she could express. She typed a response. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." His reply came seconds later. "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad I got to be there." 4 months after throwing the cigarettes over the balcony, Victoria sent Terrell a text. 4 months, still going, thank you. She didn't expect a response, didn't need one, just needed him to know that she was still here, still fighting, still winning. Terrell showed the text to his mother that night. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea helping Maya with a book report. She looked up when Terrell walked in. "Who's that?" "From a friend." His mother raised an eyebrow. "Must be some friend. You're smiling." Terrell realized he was. He'd been smiling more lately. The weight he'd carried since Shanice died had started to lift. Not gone completely. Maybe it never would be. But lighter, more manageable. "Someone I helped a few months back." "She's doing good." "That's wonderful, baby." His mother went back to helping Maya, but she watched him out of the corner of her eye. Noticed the change in him. The way he stood a little taller, slept a little better, smiled more often. She didn't know the details. Didn't need to. She just knew her son was healing. And that was enough. A week later, Terrell arrived at the penthouse for his regular shift. 11 at night, building quiet. Hallway empty. He let himself in with his key card and immediately noticed the difference. There were shoes by the door. Just kicked off, not lined up neatly. A jacket draped over the back of a chair. Mail scattered on the kitchen counter. A wine glass in the sink, not rinsed and placed upside down on a towel, but just sitting there, with a small amount of red wine still in the bottom. The apartment looked lived in. Actually lived in. Terrell walked through the space taking inventory. Books on the coffee table, real books opened and left face down to mark the page, a blanket tossed over the couch, a laptop on the dining table surrounded by papers and sticky notes, a half-empty water bottle, a pair of reading glasses. Signs of life. Signs that someone existed here, not just occupied the space. He started cleaning, straightened the books, folded the blanket, washed the wine glass, put the shoes in the closet. But he did it gently, careful not to erase too much of the disorder, because the disorder meant Victoria was living instead of hiding, existing instead of performing. He was wiping down the kitchen counter when he heard a door open. Victoria walked out of the master bedroom. She wore sweatpants and an old college t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup. She looked comfortable. Real. Terrell, sorry I forgot you were coming tonight. No problem. I can come back another time if you want. No stay. I'll just stay out of your way. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, leaned against the counter. How have you been? Good. Maya got an A on her solar system project. That's wonderful, Victoria smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. How are you doing? Really good. The talk in San Francisco went well. Better than I expected. I watched it. You were incredible. Victoria looked surprised. You watched it? Terrell nodded. With Maya. She said you were brave. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Tell her thank you. That means a lot. They stood there in the kitchen, the silence between them comfortable, familiar. The silence of two people who had been through something together and came out the other side, changed. I should let you work. Victoria set down her water glass. Good night, Terrell. Good night, Miss Reed. She started to walk toward her bedroom, then stopped. Victoria. You can call me Victoria. Terrell smiled. Good night, Victoria. She walked back to her bedroom and closed the door. Not all the way, just enough for privacy, but not locked, not sealed shut like it used to be. Terrell finished cleaning, put his supplies away, turned off the lights except for the one in the entryway, locked the door behind him. But before he left, he stood in the hallway for a moment looking back at the apartment. It felt different now, not just because of the disorder, because of what the disorder represented. A woman learning to live instead of merely surviving, learning to be imperfect, learning that the worst thing you could be wasn't weak, it was alone. Terrell thought about Shanice, about all the things he wished he'd said, wished he'd done. But for the first time in 3 years, the regret didn't overwhelm him, because this time he'd spoken up. This time he'd stayed. This time he'd made a difference. He took the elevator down to the lobby. Marcus was at the desk reading something on his phone. All good up there, all good. Terrell walked out to his car. The night was cold, clear. He could see stars, which was rare in Los Angeles. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, thought about the bag of cigarettes he'd found months ago, about Victoria's cough, about the night he found her in the hallway gasping for air, about all the moments that could have gone differently, could have ended in tragedy instead of transformation. But they hadn't, because sometimes salvation wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it was just one person seeing another person's pain and refusing to look away. Sometimes it was sitting in silence when there were no words. Sometimes it was believing in someone's strength even when they'd forgotten they had it. Terrell started the car and drove home through empty streets, thinking about Maya sleeping peacefully at his mother's house, about the life he'd built from the wreckage of loss, about the fact that helping Victoria hadn't brought Shanice back, but it had given his grief purpose, had transformed his regret into redemption. When he got home, he stood in Maya's doorway and watched her sleep, her chest rising and falling, her braids spread across the pillow. Safe, loved, growing up in a world that would hurt her sometimes, but also surprise her. Teach her, show her that broken things could heal if given time and care, and someone willing to stay. He walked to his own room, lay down on the bed, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he fell asleep without thinking about all the ways he'd failed, without replaying Shanice's death in his mind, without carrying the weight of what he should have done. He just slept, peacefully, deeply, like a man who had finally forgiven himself. In her penthouse, 42 stories above the city, Victoria lay in her own bed, eyes open, mind quiet, no cravings, no panic, No desperate need for something to take the edge off. Just peace, fragile and new and hard-won, but real. She thought about the conference, about the faces in the audience, about the people who'd come up to her afterward, tears in their eyes, thanking her for telling the truth, about the emails flooding her inbox from strangers sharing their own struggles, their own victories, their own ongoing battles. She thought about Terrell, about the night he knocked on her door when she was coughing, about how easily he could have walked away, about how he chose to stay instead, about all the ways that choice had rippled outward, changing everything. Victoria rolled onto her side and looked at the city through her window. Same view she'd had for years, but different now, because she was different, because she'd learned that the thing that kills you isn't always the habit itself. Sometimes it's the fear of being judged, the exhaustion of maintaining an image, the loneliness of carrying secrets that grow heavier every day. And sometimes the thing that saves you isn't a miracle. It's just another human being who sees the truth and refuses to let you face it alone. Victoria closed her eyes, breathed deeply, let herself drift towards sleep. Tomorrow she would go back to work, would make decisions, would lead meetings, would continue building the company she'd started in a dorm room a decade ago. But she would do it differently now, more honestly, more vulnerably, more human. And that, she realized, was worth every difficult moment of the last 4 months, worth the withdrawal, worth the fear, worth the risk of letting someone see her at her worst. Because on the other side of that risk was freedom and connection and the possibility of becoming someone real instead of someone perfect. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, two people who had found each other in the darkness slept peacefully, both changed, both healing, both learning that sometimes the greatest strength is admitting you can't do it alone. And sometimes the greatest gift is being there when someone finally asks for help.